Croatia is a small country. Chile is much bigger than Croatia. But still, as was mentioned yesterday, for many years, it was stuck in poverty. I still remember when it was led by socialist Salvador Allende in the early 70s, the Chileans were emigrating to Argentina. My relatives, Yugoslavian relatives that had escaped socialism here, ended up escaping Chile and going to the United States because the government, they had laundry shops, and the socialist government, they had 3, they took 2 away from them. People forget that. But then it can be recovered. You can become a great example, and we have, again, tremendous great speakers today. We are going to start with this order. First, Cristian Valenzuela is going to explain to us a little bit these ideas. He's the executive director of the think tank Ideas Republicanas. You know, I spent most of my life in think tanks. It's a tremendously important institution of civil society. Their job basically is to provide legislative advice, not only to the Congress, but now their congressmen, but especially now to the constitutional representatives. He is has big presence in the media. He writes for the newspaper La Tercera, and also is in these panels of opinions and experts in major TV programs. So, Cristian Valenzuela, if you can start the presentation today.
Well, thank you very much, Alejandro, and thank you for the invitation. I'll try to do my best in my English, and we'll complement later with the other panelists. I think that the title about the Chilean economic model, I would fairly say that we would like to talk about the not such as an economic model, but as an institutional model. We believe this Chilean miracle, as some people say, it's more about the institutions of Chile and how they have worked in the last decades, rather than only an economic phase of our success, if you would say so. So, talking about the miracle, as Alejandro introduced us, in the 70s we were in the verge of falling into communism or socialism, Marxism, in all their different ways that in Latin America express themselves. And in the 70s, after the coup d'etat, the government introduced different policies and made radical changes to our institutional framework. And I believe that, and the time has supported this theory, that the architecture of the Chilean institutional system is the responsible of our success and the challenges that we live in the last decade, that I will explain also. What is the cause or the foundations of this Chilean miracle, as we say? First, and we've talked in the morning with very great expositions of our past panelists. First, free market policies. As simple as that, we created the environment to make the free market policies a structural part of the Chilean economy, and with the rules and the limits and the possibility of enterprises to express themselves freely in the economy, I think is one of the structural parts of our economy. Second, talk about public expenditure and the limits of public expenditure, and the role of the state in public debt and public expenditures is also a key part of the Chilean model, that it was constructed during the 80 and 85, 90, and afterwards, when democracy returned, it was administered by different governments from left or right that sustained that model and even make important changes to make this even better. And third, I think a third axis of this is the conception of the importance of free enterprise rather than public companies, the privatization of public companies that were in Chile, the vision of the private over the state. In Chile, we call the principle of subsidiarity. It's like the central part of our constitutional arrangement, even though the Constitution never talks about subsidiarity, but it's behind all the definitions and the structure of this constitutional architecture. So these three pillars were established during the 80s and revealed themselves after 1990 when democratic governments took again the post in Chile. And during those governments, you have to add, as a fourth pillar, the free trade agreements. Chile has become one of the most open countries in the world, with free trade agreements all over the world with many countries, and that has led us to have a lot of competition. We're a small country, but very integrated on a trade sense into the world. And the fifth pillar, and Agustin is going to talk a little bit more about it, it's our fiscal responsibility, structured in the structural balance and the rule of this structural balance in the decisions we make in the executive, the legislative, in our work every day. So these pillars configure the architectural institutional framework of Chile and led us to great results. We started with 70% poverty, and we reached almost in 2010, 2013, to 10% poverty. That was a huge reduction over the last decades, one of the most important advances in the world. Our GDP per capita in 1980 was $3,000 per capita, and in 2023 we're reaching almost $30,000 per capita. And obviously the GDP total is exploded over the years. Entrepreneurship has flourished in Chile. Private companies had led the way to have an important access to education system, to health system, our social security system. All the different areas of the economy have flourished during the last decades and had led Chile to a great position in Latin America and also as an example of the world. And I would say that, and Jose Antonio talked about this yesterday, when is the tipping point for the critics of Chile to talk about our country and said we have not done enough? It was probably around 2010, 2013, when we entered the OECD, the club of the rich countries, because we were almost reaching the point that we were becoming a rich country, a developed country, where we were almost there. And as a membership of a very great group, it also comes with the comparison of when you're in the tail of that group, how many things seem worse than they really are. So the critics of the Chilean model, probably the socialists, the communists, and the residual Marxists that exist in Chile, started to talk about the failure of the economic model. This was not a miracle, because no, poverty reduction is not enough. Important growth is not enough. We have to talk about inequality. Even though inequality has been going down, it was still high by the standards of the OECD. And that led to what I would call today as a decade of shame in Chile, from 2013 to 2023, right away today. A decade of shame when the left imposed in the public discourse that Chileans had to be ashamed of 40 years of development and of great initiatives and a flourishing economy, and the reduction of poverty was something to be ashamed of rather than to be proud of. And inequality was one of the worst in the world. It was not true, but that was part of the discourse. The response to all these inequalities had to be a growing state with more power, with more resources, and that was the solution to every problem. And eventually, education was not enough. Health was not enough. We had to change our social security system because it was not enough to pay great pensions for all the people. So it led to a sense of abandonment of the population, disenchantment from many people, and eventually to insurrection. 2019 was the year when a famous quote from President Piñera, just 4 days before the great insurrection we had in October 2019, he said, in Chile we live in an oasis in Latin America because we don't have the problems that Ecuador has, Argentina has, or Peru has, because we're a great country. And only 4 days later, the subway was burned and people were on the streets. Because, in a sense, I think the left, with the discourse, tried to capture the aspiration of Chileans to go further, and the economic stagnation of bad policies taken after 2013, tax reform, labor reform, free trade agreements that were questioned by some of the left, turned us like a very stagnated country. We went, in some point of the 1990s, we're growing at 10% rate in a year, and we were growing in 2013, 2014 at a 2%, 1% GDP growth per year. So that was a manifestation of a system that required adjustments, but the left tried to put it like we don't require adjustment, we require a refoundation. We need a new architecture, institutional architecture for our country. And the response was, we should change the constitution. The problem is not a simple problem. It's not something that you need adjustment. You need to change it all. And the proposition was a new constitution, and the right parties, the center-right parties, not all the parties, conceded that point. And they also put in the side of the shame. We believe our policies have not been good, and we need structural changes to make Chile a great country again, on the opposite side. And that was 2019. 2021 was the presidential election with two radical models. One model, our model, that said we have a great country. We have had the 4 decades of the most successful policies in Latin America and even in the world on the economic sense. And we have to build onto that to get better. On the other side, President Boric, who is actually in government, talked about something radically different than that. He said, we need a new constitution, we need a bigger state, we need to review our trade agreements because they're not a condition of success rather than a condition of failure of a country. We don't need to grow. We need to review the idea of a growing country, and so on. We need to deplete the social security system. We need to put the health in the hands of the states. We need the education to go in the hands of the state also. All policies that, as we talked in the previous panel, have failed in all the world. And even in a successful system as Chile has shown in the last decades, he was proposing the other side. And he was in parallel with the first constitutional convention that proposed a change, a radical change, a refoundation, also in the constitution of Chile, telling us that the role of the state was the principle, not the private freedom, liberty. It was not the, as we said before, free market policies are not a measure of wealth and development, rather than they are repressing the people. We need to grow in our public expenditure. This fiscal responsibility is something that restrains us rather than be positive for the country. So at the end, there were two proposals for the country that were very radically different. And Chileans in the last year, since September 2022, when the reject vote of this new proposal of constitution won by a margin of 35%. And recently, in the last election of the new Constitutional Assembly, with a vote for the right also near the 65%, and with a mandatory vote, not a voluntary vote as was before, but a mandatory vote where more than 12, 13 million Chileans participated in the election, ended saying that we are not ashamed of the last 10 years, of the last 40 years. We are ashamed of the last 3 years, of the wrong policies that were put in the public arena, and the proposals of this government that now has a huge rejection from the population. And that's, I think, the lesson or the example, if we could rescue from the Chilean experience. I think every country is different in size, in history. It has its own problems and challenges, but we really believe that in Chile, the institutional model has proven to be a successful model, and you need to adjust it every time to provide better solutions for the population. But at the end, it's common sense, and when people are listened and given the platform to express themselves, they will always choose common sense and not socialism or failed policies, as we have showed in the last 2 years in Chile. And we have a great opportunity. It's nothing given. Electoral changes can go one way or the other way. And we have assumed this responsibility as a chance, as an opportunity to further the policies with clarity, with conviction, and eventually we'll have the chance in government to make the adjustments that this model needs to really be proud of the progress in Chile and eventually reach the development that we have been staging for the last year. So that is an introduction, Alejandro.